Hi folks, I know that the Kukri is a very popular weapon, and rightly so. It is a fantastic weapon. It's got a great history to it, and the Gurkhas have used it quite valiantly in lots of interesting episodes from history. And luckily there are lots of antique examples around that you can buy relatively affordably. I would hasten to mention that if you are looking to buy an old Kukri, look around, try and learn a little bit. There's a good Kukri forum on Sword Forum which you can get some really good information from, and feel free to ask some questions in the comments below this video, because I know a bit about antique kukris. I can't remember all the names of all the bits because they've all got Nepalese names and I can't remember them all. But I do, generally speaking, know how to pick an antique or at least a vintage kukri from a modern replica, and that's really the point that I'm making, is there are lots of modern replicas, and generally speaking avoid the ones which have got a lion face on the pommel, because these are fairly late 20th century crap Indian tourist replicas, crap steel, and just not very nice things. So anyway, the point that I really want to make is about this band around the middle of the grip of a kukri, and to me this is a very important design feature. I just hope that you can see there. There we go, so this band going around here. So we do know that kukris were used to thrust. This is described in British 19th century sources, and of course the Gurkhas became part of the British Army, or contributed troops to Gurkha regiments within the British Army in the 19th century, and fought in the Indian Mutiny and various Afghan wars and so on, right the way through the second half of the 19th century. Were a very important part of the British Army, just as the Sikh Indian regiments were Punjab regiments also. Now, we know from British accounts of the use of the kukri that they were used to thrust to some extent, although the way it's usually described is a thrust into the belly. Okay, so what's described as a thrust into the belly and then a ripping cut out. Now that's very interesting. If we look at the shape of this kukri, what most people accentuate is its use to chop, like a machete or like a hatchet. Okay, but actually there are more subtle ways of cutting with the kukri that are described in the 19th century sources. One of these is something similar to the drawing cut that we see with curved swords like the tulwar and the shamshir. Okay, where you're actually, instead of chopping with a swing, you're actually drawing the careful not to hit myself because it is sharp, drawing it across the target. You'll notice that naturally actually cuts into the target as you go through it. So drawing across as well as chopping. There is chopping mentioned as well. So there's chopping and there's drawing. But then the other interesting technique that I've just mentioned is they say that the first blow that Gurkhas often did in the mid-19th century was a thrust into the belly that seems to be, I would imagine, horizontal. I can't see it being vertical. Horizontal in, and then a draw cut out. Okay, so you're pushing the point in and then slicing out, and obviously the kind of bellied shape of this edge will accentuate that and do a huge amount of damage to someone's abdomen, and obviously their intestines will pop out and such like. Lovely topic, I know. I try not to be too bloodthirsty in these descriptions, but this is history, this is a real antique weapon, we're talking about how they were used. Okay, so this is an interesting other way that you can use the weapon, and one of the things you'll obviously notice, whether you've thought about it or not, is there is no crossguard or anything really up here on a kukri to stop your hand from slipping forwards. Now, one of the general rules with weapons is that if there's nothing to stop your hand slipping forwards, then usually those weapons are not used for thrusting, or at least not used for thrusting in the conventional European sense, because as soon as you meet resistance hitting this, boom, the hand would get carried up onto the blade. And in fact, in modern crime, when someone gets stabbed with a kitchen knife, it's very common for the attacker to have a cut, or several cuts sometimes, on their hands, because in their sort of fervour, in their crazy stabbing, their hand slips onto the kitchen knife blade, because kitchen knives are not designed to be stabbing implements really, they're designed to be kitchen tools, okay? And so there's nothing really to stop, on a lot of kitchen knives, to stop your hand sliding up onto the blade and cutting your own hand. Now, I should mention, if that does happen, it's not necessarily going to disable you. A lot of people talk about, oh, what if you get your hand cut, in various things we talk about on this channel, but in actual fact, yeah, you'll still stab the person, they'll still probably die, and okay, you'll have a cut in your hand, but you'll probably survive. But ideally, if you've designed a weapon that is going to give this thrust and cut out, you'd think, okay, well, shouldn't you have something to stop the hand sliding up onto the guard? Well, this is the point at which this band becomes really, really important, because if you grip the kukri in a hammer fist, what happens is that band tends to, at least with my hand, being Mr. Spock here, tends to go between the lower two fingers and the upper two fingers like that. And what that does is it locks the kukri grip into your hand. Okay, it means that the friction that you'd normally get on most swords and knives up here against your index finger is actually instead down here against this middle finger. Okay, so it stops the hand. Bam! You can now give thrusts in all kinds of angles or push cuts, and the hand doesn't carry up onto the blade because of that band around the middle. And I think it's interesting to note that lots of old kukris, most old kukris, have this band around the middle because it's an important design feature. It's not just for fashion. It feels a bit strange when you first hold it. It's clearly there for a reason. Whereas later kukris often are missing this because I think they've perhaps lost the techniques, they've forgotten about the original designs and why they're like that. And this happens a lot in history. We often discard old designs because we think it's just tradition or just, you know, it's just an old-fashioned design, and we discard things that have evolved over a long period of time because they're useful. So that middle band is useful, it's on old kukris for a good reason, yeah, it's an interesting little aspect of this design of this very particular weapon that has been very carefully evolved over a long period of time. Cheers.